I don't know.
Recording. It's a recording. Yeah.
It doesn't look like it.
I can see it now.
It is, yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. So finally, we can start. And it's with great pleasure that I am introducing Professor Darcia Narvaez, who's a professor emerita of psychology at Notre Dame University. And Darcia has a very interdisciplinary approach and incorporates moral landscapes, childhood, developmental psychology in the context of human evolution. And I first heard Darcia's work at a conference of hunters and gatherers some years ago in Vienna. And I was hearing her talk about children, childhood, play, and morality, all of which is areas that radical anthropology has been especially focused on and interested in, even though it hasn't always been central to human origins stories, but we think it should be. And then subsequently, I found a chapter by Darcia in a book that I was also involved in, the Handbook of Cognitive Archaeology, where she wrote a really excellent challenge to the ways in which psychology as a discipline was just far too narrow and Western biased in its approaches. And of course, if we are to understand how humans came to be human, and if we're going to adopt psychological approaches, we need to understand that across time, through time and across space, humans are not always narrowly Western in their experience, far from it. The majority of people are not. So that's the kind of challenge that really needed saying, and Darcia was saying it so excellently well. So we're going to hear more about that today. So over to you, Darcia.
Well, thanks so much. I'm really thrilled to be with you. Also nervous because you guys are experts in anthropology, and I kind of, take from anthropology to inform my work. So I'm hoping that you can have an open mind. I'm going to tell you a story of how I put all sorts of pieces together, and then just listen, and then you can correct me later. But don't get caught up in the details now as I'm telling the story. Otherwise, you may miss some part because it's rather complicated. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint. And go. So I'm going to talk about neurobiology and humanity's evolved developmental niche, the insights that we can see across disciplines, puzzles and promises, as you'll see that, we haven't figured everything out. So as you know, we are in a big mess, and this is even before the pandemic and economic downturns. Humanity, and I used USA here as a kind of a primary model for what's going on, because the United States, unfortunately, often is a leader in the world and exports its ways to the world. And part of that is the dominant culture of, what I'll talk about later. But we've got terrible well-being in the United States, mental illness, epidemics of drug addiction and violence, suicide, shrinking lifespan. And people under age 60 now are at a health disadvantage compared to 16 other advanced nations. Unfortunately, the UK is often at the bottom of these rankings as well. So the US and UK, child well-being usually are at the bottom of advanced nations. So there's something going on, something wrong. And I puzzled about this all my life. And so now I'm pulling together the pieces to try to explain what happened. Why are we so destructive? We're destroying our habitat. And this is not all human beings, it's the dominant culture. And you know the story, right? The Earth systems are breaking down. We've got the 4 horsemen of the environmental apocalypse, climate instability and ecological disruption and massive poisoning, massive extinctions, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to focus on those things, but I just wanted to give the setting for why we need to talk about alternatives. And here's something I like from Noam Chomsky. He says the grim prognosis for life on the planet is a consequence of a few centuries of forgetting what traditional societies knew and the surviving ones still recognize. And this must be one of our highest values, or we are all doomed. So what is that? What is it? If I can change the slide. One slide. There we go. So what has been forgotten? What is it that sustainable indigenous societies have? What do they know? What do they have to teach us in the modern world? One, we forgot the wellness informed pathway. That's a new term I've just coined last week for how our baselines have shifted away from wellness, right, to whatever we experience we think is normal. And they've noticed this in oceanography, that people thought that the oceans were whatever they experienced it in childhood were normal, the way it should be, and couldn't see, unless you look across generations, the slippage. And so we've done that too. We've forgot all sorts of things. We forgot humanity's basic needs, how humans thrive, what does that look like, how to develop heart-mindedness, which is a central concern for most societies that ever existed, not the dominant culture today, and how to support an earth-centered living know-how to live well on the earth so that we're not destructive and more responsible and respectful. Those are the things we've kind of dismissed in many ways, and in part because we shifted baselines in all these areas. So one, the child raising practices have really degraded over generations. And that leads to a neurobiology that's not very well functioning, and the adults that don't have very good well-being or morality is my area of study in particular, and the cultural beliefs that these adults have, then they impose on children and keep the cycle going in this direction. So it's really important to understand how important each of these pieces are to how we got to this pickle we're in. And where do we get a baseline? Where do we find out the pathway to wellness? Well, it's very helpful to look at anthropological studies, ethology, and similar areas of research to examine what our history is as a species. And small band hunter-gatherers are particularly helpful for this. As you know these things. They're foragers with few possessions, immediate return societies I'm talking about here, no cultivation or domestication of animals, and no resource accumulation. And they're worldwide still, although very much under duress. And many First Nations actually have similar worldviews traditionally, before the widespread colonial genocide. And we'll talk about and so when I talk about the worldview, I'm talking about what's common around the world, not the unique interrelations with the landscape, that the place-based knowledge that indigenous societies have. That's a different thing, although it's related, of course, but I'm talking about more of the commonalities. And from the reports of anthropologists and others, explorers and first contact diaries, these societies, adults are typically generous, sharing, calm, kind, cooperative, and healthy as well. And in these societies and many First Nation communities traditionally, basic needs are met. We'll look at a little bit of that. And they provide a companionship lifestyle, a ability to get along well with others, enhance one another's well-being, and pretty much peaceably. And they use the fission approach to solving unresolvable problems. Just move along and live somewhere else, right? Multi-age social life, really critical, it seems, for biological functioning. Testosterone, for example, in males goes down when they're with children. We know this with fathers. And now we tend to isolate males, right? And that's what, at least from my understanding, men used to have to do to go on a raiding party. They'd isolate themselves so their testosterone levels would go up, is my speculation. So in these societies, a lot of singing and dancing and laughter and leisure. And no central authority, fluid boundaries, no strong out-group bias, high autonomy, individual choice, high solidarity at the same time, and the gift economy within the group, the sharing and the rotating of materials, of food, and so on. This is part of nature, the gift economy that capitalism, of course, shuts down. And they have really small egos, but large selves. So they feel a sense of commonality, oneness with the larger world. They don't feel so separated as we force children to feel in modern societies. And so they have an enhancement really of the communal moral self, as they call it. They shape attention through all this kind of experience, and it keeps them in what I would call a moral mood, this open, welcoming attitude through this physical embodied way of being. Lots of touching and playing and practices of gratitude. We can see, especially in Native American practices. So what I see, how I interpret their way of being is a companionship culture, cooperative companionship, where the child is given a companionship, and I'll talk about what that means. And that leads to a good physio-neurosocial biology, which leads to adults who are well and actually become wise. And those adults then lead the community to attend to basic needs. Everyone just assumes you meet basic needs. And all this is done with a sense of living on an earth, a living earth, not apart from it, as our modern culture kind of pushes us. So what does that companionship caregiving look like? Well, this is what we call the evolved nest. I'll say more about it in a moment, just many moments ahead. It's really about mothering and nurturing. And notice what's asterisked. These are unilateral gifts initially that the women typically provide, but also others, mothers and others. So you can see that the original provision of the nest is a gift to the child. There's no expectation the baby's going to give you something back, right? Although you get good feeling. So let's go through what is this nest? Well, we also call it in our academic papers evolved developmental niche. Sounds more academic and professional and cool, I suppose, but for the public we say evolved nest. And these practices are the nest is one of many inheritances we receive from our ancestors, which is a set of social and ecological circumstances that are typically inherited by members of a given species. Every animal has one. And in effect, evolution has done the experiments about what works for adaptation. And human babies are particularly vulnerable in the early years because they resemble fetuses of other animals till 18 months of age. So until 18 months of age, the human skull does not fuse. And the brain is expecting to grow larger than at birth extensively, because the brain is only the size of 25% of adult volume at birth. This is full-term birth. A lot of children are pulled out of the womb now before full-term birth, which has its issues. And so what grows that brain? All the evolved nest components, especially touch and breastfeeding responsiveness. So the point is, and you can see this in our hunter-gatherer cousins, that they meet the needs of babies quickly so that they're kept in a calm state, which is necessary because of the biochemistry you want is a positive biochemistry. Under stress, that's a negative biochemistry that's going to then inhibit growth or grow the wrong things, which is what we're going to see. So we are biosocially formed, dynamically shaped. So the social experiences we have in those early years, 0 to 4, 0 to 5 especially, but earlier is more important because we are a dynamic system. So our trajectory is shaped by early how things start out, just like weather patterns. And the trajectory then just builds on the earlier experiences, where this is process philosophy kind of stuff too. So our biology is built, shaped by our social experiences, and then that kind of biology is part of what drives or guides our own social behavior later, which we'll talk about. So our heritages then are this set of social capacities that are developed within the nest: a social enjoyment, concern for the opinion of others, and empathy, things that are related to what Darwin called the moral sense. He thought they were inherited more genetically, but actually I argue that it's probably epigenetic, meaning that genes have to be, or plasticity based, meaning that you have to have the experience to develop these things. They don't just come along with you like eye color. And then moral capacities too. These are things that we develop in our early nested experience, taking the perspective of others, cooperating, sympathy, compassion. I could talk a lot more about this, but I'm just kind of giving you the overview. This is in contrast to the received view that we're hardwired for violence, selfishness, and aggression. And you better have strong political institutions to take care of these wild, self-centered people. Well, we got mounting evidence from multiple disciplines that, of course, counters this view. So that early development is the body, brain, mind development occur together. There's a constant interaction between nature and nurture. The baby is a different baby 5 minutes later. They can change and shift their mood because things are growing so rapidly and they're trying to figure out how to live outside the womb. They need a lot of help. They need a womb with a view. It's actually Montague's term. And so many things are happening every few, thousands, maybe millions of synapses, brain connections are occurring every moment for that child. So epigenetic things are happening. That means genes are being turned on or off based on experience. We have lots of animal studies on these things. You can't really do the same kinds of experiments on babies, human babies. It's unethical. And we're really plastic dynamically initially, and then we get less and less plastic with age. Our plasticity of our brain functions. And so caregivers are co-constructing both emotions and cognitions. They're intertwined in the brain. People say this area of the brain is about emotions, and they study that. Some other researcher will study the same thing and call it cognition. So it's all intertwined. And what happens in those first years, before you can speak and understand words even, is you're developing a sense of yourself. What kind of self am I? And it's going to matter for later because it guides you in the way you live in the world. It also develops that time period, your social worldview, what you think about the world. Is it a safe place or unsafe? Can I trust relationships or not? All that's built by how the baby is treated in those first years. So the evolved nest then is one of our inheritances that then leads us, it's a species typical developmental system that leads us then to a species typical outcome which is a smart, effective creature. Unsmart, ineffective creatures don't last. They're not adaptive, right? So we have inherited this system that actually enhances our well-being. So in the evolved nest, you might think, oh, more work for mom. No. This is something that's provisioned by a community. Yes, mom has the baby in her womb and perhaps breastfeeds that baby, but everything, even breastfeeding though, is shared by the community. In our hunter-gatherer groups, many times everyone suckles the child, even if a father or a man or someone unrelated people will suckle the child to comfort them, right? So it's not necessarily for nourishment. Most of these practices are 30 to 40 million years old. They emerged with the social mammals, only slight changes with our human evolved nest. And Melvin Conner calls it the hunter-gatherer childhood model. And I'm going to go through each of these. There's the prenatal and perinatal experiences, breastfeeding, positive touch and no negative touch, a positive climate, self-directed social play, multiple allo mothers or allo parents, responsive relationships. Again, the contented baby is really foundational for health. Nature connection, we've separated this out, and healing practices. So we could probably name other things, but these are the things we can study in my lab, and my colleagues and I look at this, and I'll show you a little data later. So let's look at number one. So soothing perinatal experiences or prenatal. Also, what do we know from the hunter-gatherers? They provide a calm, welcoming environment during gestation, during birth and post-birth. There's no, separation and such painful procedures typically that you can see in modern society. And the natural rhythms of the mother and child are followed. So babies vary in how long they stay in the womb by about 55 days. So when a doctor selects a due date, they're guessing, right? And medicalized birth is about control. And so they will force moms and babies to come out, or the baby to come out, despite the fact the baby doesn't want to yet, right? But they can't, they're too impatient and such for various reasons. So the natural way is to be sensitive to the signals of the baby when they're ready, during, when they're ready for birth, but also after birth. But the common practices in the United States are really stressful to babies. And I understand in UK, is that 2/3 of mothers say they had a traumatic birthing experience. So it's not just US. There's interference with the timing. Labor drugs can drug the baby who has trouble in breastfeeding or just being alert. Medical routines are known to harm traumatized children. Bright lights and smells of alcohol, rough treatment, separation, vaccination, which happens in the States, and infant circumcision. Parents don't really know what they're doing here. That's a horrible experience for a baby. And then what gets interrupted then is this infant mother entrainment, because their bodies are ready to glom onto each other magnetically in those first hours after birth. But if you've interrupted all sorts of things, that can get disrupted too. Second one on request breastfeeding. Notice this table here, it's got our genus on the left there, our cousins, the gestational, how long they stay in the womb is the second column. Third column, the brain volume at full-term birth. And recall, perhaps you will recall, that the reason we are born so immature is because when we moved to bipedalism, the pelvis had to shrink, and mothers then had to give birth earlier than our ape cousins, because the head gets too large otherwise. And then you see the first and last permanent teeth. These are signals of cognitive development, and they're related to nursing. And you can see in our average length of nursing for humans in our ancestral context is 4 years, 2 to 8 years observed. And physical growth here is 20 for humans, but the neuroscientists tell us it's around 30 for the brain. So what do we know from hunter-gatherers about breastfeeding? It's on request, not on schedule, not controlled by the adults or others. And when comfort is needed, everyone can scold the child, as I said. And there's so many benefits to breastfeeding. It's amazing. It's got thousands of ingredients. They are tailored to the needs of that baby, male or female. The milk is different. Whether there's an infectious agent in the region, the mother's body will produce an antibody for the child. The saliva of the child is signaling to the breast what is needed. When there's a growth spurt, the milk will provide more fat. Early milk is different than when the baby's young is different than milk when the baby's older. And it has antimicrobial and protective biofilm that keeps the baby from getting infected. It protects the immune system, which is mostly in the gut. You get larger brain sizes, greater myelination, which is the coating of the brain neurons, and that's linked to intelligence and so on. So there's tons of things that are really wonderful about breastfeeding. Lots of misinformation out there about it. Moving touch and no negative touch. What do we know from our hunter-gatherer cousins? I like E. Richard Sorensen, social anthropologist, who has great descriptions of what he felt. He did a lot of filming, as you may know, started the film archive, and found, he says that he didn't realize what he was experiencing until years later when he was looking at the films. And these are things then he's describing from his experiences and the films. Infants are in continuous bodily contact with mothers or others, and they are not put down. Even when the person is carrying a heavy load, the baby is still in arms. Babies had priority. They're not deprived of constant, ever-ready, interactive body contact, even when things were difficult, when they're on the move and so on. So this is our heritage for how a baby should be treated, in my view. And we know from animal studies that separating a mammal baby from the mother dysregulates multiple systems, causing lifelong changes in stress responsivity. And this can be even for just an hour a day in those first weeks, for example, for a sheep, a goat, or a horse. And the result is impulsive, violent, and antisocial behavior, and depressive disorders can be related here. Rocking is good, so get a rocking chair if you become a grandparent or parent, because it promotes both brain development and digestion, because it's stimulating the cilia in the gut to help that baby learn to digest food that's not that's coming through the digestive system, unlike in the placenta in the womb. And we know that mammals need touch to grow and synthesize DNA. It promotes touch promotes healthy sleep cycles and adaptive behavioral arousals, exploratory activities, all sorts of things, right, that we expect a healthy person to exhibit, and lots of long-lasting benefits of preventing excessive stress, hippocampal dysfunction, which is related to memory, and preventing depression. At the same time, we know that negative touch has long-term negative effects, and is now, after decades of study and meta-analyses, spanking has been termed a abuse. It's similar to physical and emotional abuse in its long-term effects on children. How about positive climate? What do we know from the hunter-gatherer communities? This is Sorensen again. Eliciting delight from babies was a desired social norm, and attentive tactile stimulation was the daily lot of infants. So lots of body-to-body caressing and snuggling and oral sensuality, hugging, fondling, kissing, all sorts of things that probably would disturb a Westerner. He didn't get too specific. And this was just part of how the community treated a baby. Positive social climate for anybody would be one that has more positive than negative emotions, more joy and serenity, and less sadness and anger. And in our studies, we find that adults who report more of these positive emotions in childhood are more secure in terms of attachment, that means more able to get along with others, mentally healthier and less distressed, and less likely to be more self-centered in their moral capacities. And so a positive environment is going to help people feel cherished and so on. Self-directed social play. Sorensen tells us that play was spontaneous, improvised, exploratory, Small children were never in the way, and instead they were social pleasure for the older children, always welcomed, and so on. So young children too played, but everyone played in these societies. Everyone enjoyed being playful and interactive and bantering and so on throughout life. Self-directed social play, we know, facilitates emotion regulation development, including aggressive urges. It influences gene expression. It fosters brain development, all sorts of ways. A lot of the work is done with animals, but we have parallels found among humans. And one of the key things about play and key things about actually the early years is the right hemisphere is scheduled to grow more rapidly than the left hemisphere. And the right hemisphere is related initially to self-regulation, self-control, vagus nerve, subjectivity, intersubjectivity and social pleasure, emotional intelligence and empathy and beingness, its ability to self-transcend. What's interesting is that if you were undercared for in your early life, playing with young children face-to-face, running around, playing chase or tag, wrestling and all that, because you have to be in the present moment, it grows that right hemisphere. So I always recommend that for people who were undercared for. Allo mothers, we know Sarah Hurdy's work, right? We evolved to raise children in a community of allo mothers. We have a shorter birth interval. It's suspected because of this, because of alloparent assistance. We didn't have to wait 6 to 8 years between offspring, but 3 to 4. And the presence of grandmothers, especially, have been studied, Kristen Hawkes and others, to show that they will enhance the survivability of the child. And the ability to take multiple perspectives is also related to having more than one responsive caregiver. So mothers need support to care well for their children. This is just the way it is. They need layers of support, and we know it's related positively to children's outcomes. As Stephanie Kuntz says, children do best in societies where child rearing is considered too important to be left entirely to parents. Indeed, inexperienced parents are not that great, and if they were poorly raised themselves, they're going to be worse, is what the animal studies show. Responsive relationships. The whole evolved nest is really about responsiveness. Hewlett and Lamb, their book Hunter-Gatherer Childhoods, have kind of this inspired our work, this quote, which has most of those components of the nest there. And Gina Morelli on the FE says, told us at a conference I held, that if a baby cries, all the adults will say, pick up the baby, pick up the baby. And the length of baby cries, she reports, is less than 20 seconds, which I think is, shocking to people in the United States. They think, oh, babies cry, that's just the way it is, So responsiveness has to do with reciprocal communication, the synchronizing of emotion, cognition, bodies, the communicative musicality, which is Colin Trevathan's term, having mutual influence on one another, building shared narratives, shared little interactions, patterns, and meeting the child's needs in the moment. So this is going to then establish good brain wiring, emotion regulation, and a trajectory for habitual patterns of being able to self-calm, because you've learned how to calm from your caregivers. Nature connection. Well, of course, foragers are highly integrated with the rest of the natural world, or they wouldn't survive. They're very ecologically fitted to their local landscapes. They feel at home. They're very placeful, unlike people in the United States are very placeless, and they treat the natural world with respect. We know that daily activities such as these lower cortisol, such as sunning and earthing, and that's lying on the earth, and bird watching and hiking and such. So being connected to, even having pictures of the outdoors on your wall helps with healing in hospitals and such. And we did an experiment that was published last year with college students, and we could increase their nature connection, their ecological attachment after 3-week intervention. Or about that if you want. I'm looking at the time. So healing practices, we know that among the Krum, talking out conflicts is highly important. They're very verbal. Other healing rituals, particular healing rituals, are discussed, such as the dances and the Na'am. They heal all sorts of illnesses, physical, emotional, spiritual, mend relationships, and then foster the community bonding. So we think these things are critical as part of the evolved nest for a lifetime. And today, what we can do, since we don't have those same opportunities, we can do singing that activates the vagus nerve, which is calming, meditation and talking with friends. Physical stress too helps rebalance the self, helping others. Healthy development then begins and then is sustained by the nest throughout life. So everything except the breastfeeding and the birth keep going in these societies. So these are ways to live well. So what we end up here with is the cycle of cooperative companionship. That is a thriving human beings, thriving children, adults, and a societal thriving too. So what happens though when you move from, and this is all public domain pictures, there are better pictures, but it's public domain, pictures of what happens when you move away from this in early childhood to these kinds of routine experiences. Well, that means you're receiving, for example, a species atypical developmental system. We shouldn't be surprised that we have a species atypical outcome, meaning we're outside the evolved range of intelligence and effectiveness. That's what we see now all over the USA, as you probably read in the news. Something's wrong. So what happens with unnestedness? Well, it seeds ill health of various kinds, as I've mentioned, the mental illness, physical, social, moral, a sense of disconnection from self, from others, from the community, and from the world, the natural world. So what happens physiologically? We know the stress response gets set up improperly, the immune system, all these systems are affected because they require that external womb to grow properly, or else, they're oriented, they just don't grow, or they're so stressed that they grow the wrong things. And psychologically, you distrust your own body, have an impaired sense of self, you start to live against others instead of with them. We think that's normal. Becomes socially disagreeable, more oppositional or withdrawing depending on the situation. And you end up with anxiety, cynicism, and demonizing the others because you don't know how to get along. The brain, Paul MacLean, neuroscientists suggested these global brain states that we can get into. Because the survival systems were born with these emotion systems of anger, fear, panic, seeking, lust. These are mammalian systems. They're integrated with the stress response, fight, flight, freeze, faint. And we're born with those. The other systems have to be nurtured after birth. And with a well-nested person is going to then develop the ability to control these survival systems if they get panicked for some reason. Your shadow comes across the room, you think it's a bear, and then, oh no, it's just a shadow. Then your executive functions immediately calm you down. And you spend your life more in what we see with the hunter-gatherer communities in this heart-centered imagination, that they're connected, they feel at one with the whole, they're just not self-focused, they're more relationally focused. But what happens when things go wrong in that early life, this toxic stress of not getting your needs met for all of the nest components, are going to then create a brain that enhances survival systems, doesn't grow the executive functions, these abilities to calm yourself down and imagine alternatives, don't get grown properly. And we know the blood flow shifts when the stress response kicks in. You can't think very well. And if you're constantly feeling threatened, it's going to always shut you down. And if your early experience wasn't well nested, your mammalian capacities, your sociality, your care and play emotion systems aren't going to be as well developed. That's all right hemisphere stuff, right? So you're going to reside between the survival systems and some form of abstraction. Let's see. So your face-to-face orientation is going to be this social opposition, right? You're going to move into aggression. And a lot of violent criminals do this easily. But it's not just a physical thing. It can be mental and intellectual, shut down your opponent and your academic opponent, or social withdrawal. You'll just not be yourself. You'll just hide in the corner and be a wallflower because that preserved you in your childhood. So if you as a baby had to scream and scream before your needs were met, and then they finally were met and you still were screaming, you'll end up favoring more of the fight orientation. If you had to scream and scream and no one ever came and you had to just shut down to preserve your life, you'll get more into the social withdrawal orientation, or you can flip between them. Or if you were abused, your emotional dissociation will kick in easily when stress happens. You'll get numb and you'll disappear and you won't be here. You'll be a robopath, one term for it. So in terms of morality, when the survival systems take over, you're going to have a self-protectionist orientation, opposition or withdrawal. And your imagination there is going to be used for viciousness, to control others, harm others, or you're just going to be detached from relationships down there on the right. And just, go reside in your mind, not your heart. You're disconnected from your heart and your emotions and your intuitions, because you just never had a chance to develop them well. And so what's missing then is the social engagement there on the left and the communal imagination that we see in our cousins. So our data, just real fast here, we've developed various measures. Here's one, evolved nest provision. We had 3 countries, USA, Switzerland, China. We asked parents to report on how often their 3 to 5-year-old kids experience these things: positive touch, negative touch, play, self-directed play outside or inside, and then family togetherness at home or outside the home. And just these 6 items. We looked at normal, social, moral development. Now on the left side are all our controls: parent age, education, income, responsiveness, because we know responsiveness is related to everything. So we wanted to control for that just to see if those 6 other things mattered. And the 6 things are EDMPR, the Evolved Developmental Niche Provision Report. That's the red line. So you can see when there's asterisk, that means it's significant, and more asterisks is better. And then on the right side are what we call moral socialization, standard measures of these children's empathy, their ability to control their conduct when mom's not around, internalized conduct, inhibitory control, to stop something, stop behaving some way, and concern after wrongdoing. All right, so the left side is going to stay the same, and I'm going to show you some other poor social moral development. So left, this is all USA. I'm just showing USA. Social maladaptation, then the right side shows you what we mean by that. Oppositionalism, misbehavior, distrust, withdrawal, anxiety. How much do they show those things the parents are telling us in a checklist? And you can see that the NEST provision report, the red line, is significantly related to that. And the negative thing means the less nested kids have more social maladaptation. And then the optimization, which is what I aim for. Then you can see the same things on the left, and then the nest provision is significant here, with 2 asterisks. And on the right side, what we call sociality or social thriving. So how attuned they are when they're with others, social enjoyment and consideration of others, imagination, thriving, happiness. So you can see we're finding ways to measure this. It's really hard to measure because you just need a camera in everybody's house, right? And nobody's going to want that. And then you have to code all of what you see. It's very complicated. And we also have some more recent research from 6-year-olds about free play in the last week. They actually then have better vagus tone, the vagal tone, the vagus nerve function, which is related to all the major organs of the body. But we've also done adult studies. Here's one where we ask them about same questions about their childhood. We add also climate, how positive or negative their climate was. And then we find that the more of the nest they experienced in childhood that they report, the better their attachment security. This is a standard way to measure social capacities. And mental health is better, less anxiety and depression. And then they're better at perspective taking and more relationally attuned to others. And we had negative pathways as well, less nest, less attachment security, worse mental health, and worse interpersonal capacities, either lower perspective taking or they got too personally distressed to interact with others. And then that led to ethical orientations of self-protection, which is withdrawal or opposition. So withdrawal for personal distress. So what I write about is how the moral sense then is diminishing in the US in particular. There's less social pleasure, empathy is decreasing. College students over decades, people live alone more. Over 50% of households are single adults. Memories are terrible in the US. Social concern for the opinion of others is really, people are pretty rebellious. And then the ability to develop habits to control themselves, to fit in, really diminished. So it's all not going in the right direction. So undercare then leads to instability, insecurity, and disconnection, whereas nested care is going to lead to stability, self-security, and connectedness. These are the things that I write about and worry about. So in each situation, you have the option. So neuroception, you come to a situation and is it safe or unsafe? So that bottom up, do you feel safe or unsafe? It happens so quickly you don't know you're doing it. And when you feel safe, you're going to be, if you have the capacities, to be attuned to others and be flexible and open. But if you feel unsafe, you'll go into defensiveness somehow. You'll either try to be, show how smart you are, or just hide, and you're bracing against life. These things happen quickly and they can be habitual then, right? So an unnested person is going to hang out on the right side there more than a nested person would. And the other way you can shift into safe or unsafe is top down. These are the stories that you tell about yourself or about the world. And they can, if you're told green people are dangerous, be careful, and you see a green person, boom, you're going to go into the unsafe side because you've been told this story, and you will then go into a defensive mode. So it matters what stories we tell. So what we've ended up now with in the States is this degraded nest, developmentally inappropriate child rearing and undercare, relating to then developing poorly developed children. Psychosocial neurobiologies are all kind of dysregulated. The adults then are ill, have limited social moral capacities for neurobiological reasons, but also the story reasons. And then degraded culture because the adults are distracted, overwhelmed, over-controlling, under-controlling, neglectful, whatever it is, and they keep the cycle going. And that's where we are. And I'm going to skip this. And we have adverse childhood experiences that are increasing so there's trauma as well as unnestedness. I'm going to skip that too. And so what we have in the States is a lot of social self-protection ethics. So it's all about me against you or us against them. And the imagination is used for those self-protective aims. And there's not a lot of this in what I call engagement ethic, that relational attunement and openness that we see with small band hunter-gatherers. And because people are so dysregulated, you've got to have a lot of laws and rules to keep them in from being overly destructive. And there really is a loss of heart. They're missing the heart-mindedness that is part of our species heritage. So we've fallen off the way to become an other inclusive personality, the way to become fully human. And now we have moved into a self-focused personality, and we think it's normal. We think that's humanity. That's the way humans are. Skip that. So I argue then that it's ethical to provide what babies need, and it's unethical to deny them what babies need. And we really are doing the latter more than the former. So how do we get here? Why? these are puzzles. Then how did we manage to kind of undermine our own children's development? I think the shift to patriarchy and hierarchy is critical there, and exactly when and how is the puzzle, one of the puzzles. And we certainly have forgotten our fullest capacities. And these are the list of things that we can see among the San Bushmen. For example, John Young has lived with them, and others report these things. So they have quiet mind, inner happiness, very vital, are fully alive, autonomous and honest, honesty, sense of humor, outstanding memories and senses. They build habits at will. They have know-how for getting along in the landscape. They feel ecologically attached, and they have a connection to spirit, awareness of reality beyond the manifest. They enjoy, on the right side, they enjoy being with others, enhance their well-being. They're relationally attuned, empathic, unconditionally listen, communally oriented, authentically helpful when needed, unconditionally love and forgive. They don't hold grudges because of all the healing practices they do as well. They're generous and sharing, egalitarian, no coercion, respect for ancestors, future generations, and responsibility. Have a sense, the wise elders have a sense of responsibility towards the web of life. So we forgot that. We also have lost the capacity here, or it's buried for polysemy, the flow state of being de-differentiated with the other, which is dominant in these societies, which is right hemisphere dominant. So this is a multi-perspectivalism. So being able to shift perspectives and call somebody, there's no identity, no firm naming and categorizing of things, but it depends on the context and mood, how you talk about something or relate to something. This transpersonalism, finding oneness with others through de-differentiation, and being fully in the now. So why worry about the future? The earth will take care of you is the dominant view, at least it used to be. And that is something that's really been lost in civilization, and all the worry about tomorrow, right? Will the crop fail? This is not part of the way of being in our ancestral context. So there's a heavy connection to others, to ancestors, the spiritual dimensions, and the dynamism, just the loving being alive. And the contrast is what's occurred with the Sumer and subsequent civilization is univocity. So this is a problem-solving, linear thinking, and needed if you're going to grow crops and figure out when to plant them and when to harvest, etc. And this moves into then categorization thinking. So it's very left brain, hierarchical, obsession with order and precision and prediction. And Marvin Bram talks about how it's just infused hierarchically arranged societies so that everyone is in the structure of some sort and no one can be at the top, just a few at the top of the pyramid. And there's great anxiety and death terror, in part because of the loss of the now. The sense of presence is thin, and the focus is on the future, and of course death is coming. So what we've done over the course of Western civilization is we've degraded the evolved nest, which I think is related to these things, because moms had to go work in the field, right? So they just hung up the baby in a swaddle or left it with the younger children, didn't breastfeed as long, didn't hold them as long, didn't play with them. I mean, all sorts of things started to degrade. And so you end up then with these kinds of ways of being that I've mentioned, the self-protectionism, the suppression of polysemy. It's too dangerous, and it's dismissed as romantic or, naive or childish, sense of disconnection generally. And then this dishonoring of nature and the cycle of life, and coercion taken as normal. That's what you have to do to live in the world, have grit, and control those people and control that baby. Don't spoil it. So we got all these myths going on. And so we don't reach our potential. Whereas our original companionship societies had a maternal gift economy that started with that unilateral giving and then infused society with the reciprocity and the movement of gifts among the community, social and ecological wealth, still not economic wealth. And now our economic globalization has forced the dominant view on the world, and there's diminished social and ecological wealth all over the world at the price of economic wealth for a few. And polysemy was dominant, now universality is. So the puzzle is, how much can we or should we restore? Can we be so-called highly indulgent of children's needs and demands, so-called demands? Can we reduce then, can we have increased density of social support for moms so they have less pressure on them? Can we improve paternal care? Can we help children delay weaning? Because there's something about weaning too early that actually undermines the confidence of the child. And then they need to, James Prescott says that we need 2.5 years of breastfeeding and carrying children for peaceable societies. It's related, he looked at the 400 and some societies and tried to assess which ones were peaceful and what was related. And the other thing that was related and explained 100% of the variance was the minimal restrictions on sexuality. So there's something going on here, and what can we do about it? What can we change back to? And the promises are that the evolved nest is really wellness informed and trauma preventing, whereas we're doing the opposite in our modern way of raising children. And our stories do influence our perspective, and we can change. So evolved nest supports thriving in all sorts of ways. So let's remember that. When thriving society looks more like this, lots of positive social engagement, shared music, dance, song, laughter, and very little social self-protection. You can see the imagination is used for emotionally engaged communal imagination. The stories we hear and tell matter. And David Corton says that we are stuck right now in a sacred money and market story, and we need to return to a sacred life and living earth story. So that's going to influence whether we attend to basic needs or not. The story I'm telling you is that yes, we should respond to basic needs and provide them, and then we can shift our cycle. So at any point we can modify what we're doing. We can change our stories. That's going to then affect the nest provision, the companionship. We can change companionship or the way we raise children to companionship and improve their neurobiology. We can also provide ways for children to self-care, and which I do with my students, and then build adults who are wise and well back again from a lot of healing that has to happen and come back to that community, thriving community. So there are two basic worldviews, according to Robert Redfield, a sociocultural anthropologist. He thought there were more than two at first, but then he boiled it down to two. The left one is the one we're stuck in at the moment, fragmented, disenchanted, amoral cosmos, where only humans have spirit, only humans matter. Humans are the pinnacle. It's really been dominant for just a few hundred years. People are there's a basic restlessness, a sense of homelessness on the earth. Let's go to Mars. We conform landscapes to some abstract ideals instead of conforming ourselves to the landscape, and we hoard out of fear. Whereas the right side is the dominant perspective among indigenous societies, First Nation societies all over the world. This is the general worldview of a unified, sacred, and moral cosmos, that spirit pervades all things. We're mutually related to all. And humans are really the younger siblings that have much to learn from the other entities on the earth, the sentient earth. We feel placeful in these societies. We fit with the local landscape and the bio-community, and we share and share. And I'm almost done here. Sorry, I'm running out of. So in my book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, I looked at wisdom traditions, and the Western wisdom tradition is the Christian and Islamic and Jewish tradition where, and anyway, I looked at that, and then I called this primal wisdom, which is the indigenous wisdom of what I was just talking about. And they have a lot in common, that wisdom exists beyond intellect, accesses other realms, that humans have special responsibilities, involves surrender to the energy realm, ego detachment. Wisdom is state dependent, that we are one in love. Fear has to be overcome. These are things then that in the Western wisdom tradition, the adults came into spiritual practices to learn these things through various forms of prayer and meditation. In the primal wisdom tradition, you're just raised to hear. You're just raised with this view. You're raised with this understanding and develop it more thoroughly and as you grow and mature. And then look at the bottom here, things that are different. In the primal perspective, compassion should be expressed towards all of the natural world, whereas in the Western tradition, the natural world is scary, right? And so you only express it towards other people, except for St. Francis. And then what is feared in the primal wisdom tradition is alienation from animal nature, that you forget you are an animal. Whereas you see in the Western tradition, animal nature, oh no, don't want to be an animal. And I think that comes from the way babies have been misraised for so long. They think that that angry, tantrumy child is our animal nature, but that's because of what they've done to that child. So we can return to this cooperative companionship cycle. And there's a new film out. You probably don't have time to watch it, but I have a link here to it, but you can just look it up. It just came out Monday, breakingthecyclefilm.org, that we created to try to talk about these things with lots of pictures for people to realize it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to be so miserable. We don't have to be so destructive. This is not human, right? It's almost like we're subhuman at the moment. So please watch the film when you get a chance. Oh, it's going to start. Oops, sorry. How do I move here? Sorry if I push. There we go. So more information. Thank you for listening. Thank you for, I get so excited. Thank you for my blathering, for listening to that. There's more information here. Web page has lots of papers to download. My blog, I write about this stuff all the time. breakingthecyclefilm.org and evolveness.org. Thank you.
Share screen.
Wow.
All right, thanks. Sorry for the whirlwind.
Well,
Thank you so much for putting that whole picture together. Yeah, do you want to say that I'm opening the floor to people's comments and questions, but thank you so much, Darcia, for putting that whole picture together. It's very interdisciplinary viewpoint. My connection's not very good. Chris, do you want to chip in?
well, just to say that that was absolutely marvelous, beautifully expressed, and it just gave me the feeling that somehow, where have we been? I mean, how come we haven't met each other before? And it just gives me.
We have.
Well, we have kind of. Yes, I know we have met each other, but I mean, somehow, I don't know. Rag's been working. We've been working, you know, going down our own road, and you, Darcia, have been doing your stuff, and somehow, the overwhelming feeling I have is that your stuff needs to be absolutely right out there. It needs to be almost the first thing people encounter when it comes to what does it mean to be human. That's the fundamental question of anthropology, and what you've just told us, just I don't know, just absolutely captures it. So absolutely beautiful. Okay. Now, what was obviously wonderful to us in RAG was your stress on mothers and others, grandmothering, for very familiar figures to all of us in radical anthropology groups. So Sarah Hurdy in particular. I suppose I just want to kind of ask a question. You began by saying we're in a mess, and we sure as hell are in a mess at the moment. I mean, and you didn't want to go into it because it's so absolutely obvious. So I suppose my question is about the past and origins and evolution, because, I mean, as you've stressed, we need to get out of the mess. And I suppose what we in RAG have focused on more than the positive stuff that you've been telling us about what it means to be human and all the effects of, proper investment in childcare, all the effects on the emotions of the brain. In RAG, we've focused, I suppose, more on the idea that we were once in a mess, and we got out of it. And so, just to say a couple of things, you mentioned Tim Ingold and also Sarah Hurdy, and there's a huge difference between those two figures, because Sarah Hurdy is a selfish gene Darwinian, and Tim Ingold is ferociously opposed to any such theoretical framework. And I'm on Sarah Hurdy's side, and I think it's important to realize that Sarah Hurdy she began by talking about a huge mess, if you like, at least massive contradictions and problems in our evolutionary ancestors. So she did stress infanticide, for example. That's where she almost started out, is how non-human primates, they're not very nice to each other. And so when you mentioned some of the patterns which we all need and admire so much are 30 to 40 million years old. They're kind of normal patterns ever since the mammals began to evolve. I suppose I do think we need to be aware that that some extreme, what to us as humans are extremely unpleasant things go on in the animal world among not just mammals in general, but primates in particular. And so, how do we get out of the mess? And I suppose I'm just hoping we can all connect up, because we really need to connect up, and somehow to stress how things should be is very, very important, and just to stress how things were is very, very important. But of course you ended up with saying we need to get out of the mess, but precisely how? And if we've never been in a mess like this and got out of it, it would make it a bit more difficult than if we have been in a terrible mess in the past and we did get out of it. And I suppose what I'm just saying is, you mentioned patriarchy. Well, common chimps are massively patriarchal. And so patriarchy isn't a sort of recent invention of civilization. It's something which is, alive and kicking in nature. And of course, other close chimpanzee relatives of ours, bonobos, are matriarchal. So it's just, whereas Tim Ingold's position doesn't have any, I don't think, any dynamic, any sort of, you don't get a feeling of movement from one place to another in anything that in Tim's written. Whereas Sarah Hurdy, I think, very powerfully explains how we got out of a mess in the past through female strategies in particular, directed actually against a very prevalent and long-standing strand of strategies of the biological primate male. So there's conflict leading to the resolution of conflict. And I suppose I'm just wondering, I've said too much, but I imagine you feel okay about all that, and I'm just wondering how you respond.
Yeah, well, I should have said I'm hoping you guys can help me learn more, and I want to integrate your work with mine. It's just a recent discovery to me, so I'm excited about that. And I guess I don't really have an answer for you. I think we have evolved to be a little more well, the cooperation and the social brain, as you guys talk about, is so important for our species now, much more than for other apes. And that transition, something different about us, and it allows us to be more flexible, right? And what we've done is we've forced children into being more ape-like, more primate-like by
Yeah.
the way we raise people. And so it's like, what happened? We were going in this direction and now we turned back.
Sure.
So I don't know, the specifics about how to get there. I think the film is rather powerful. Always makes me cry when I watch our little 5-minute film.
Well, why don't you show us the film? I mean,
Why don't you
Should
show
I?
it?
I don't see
Okay.
that at all. I'd love to see the film. Yeah.
I'm sure most people would like to see it.
All right. Yep. That might give people more.
Yeah. The 5-minute one.
We've been told a story that we are selfish, aggressive, rugged individuals. But if that were true, we should have no problem with physical distancing and self-isolation. The pandemic showed us that this story is not who we are.
Can we see that? We're not
That's
seeing.
because we evolved in cooperative bands.
Can
of
you
kin
see
and
it?
non-kin.
No, it's
go-
very small. I can't see any movement. I
No,
can't see.
I can't. Can you just go to YouTube and find it?
Yep. I was at
Might be
YouTube,
a
I
better
thought.
way to do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's on your slide. It's stuck on the slide.
Oh. Okay. So I'm going to close the slideshow.
Well, with any luck, whatever's on your screen,
Perhaps, yeah.
including YouTube, will be on our screen.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Close the slideshow. YouTube.
Well, that's a slide.
Yeah, you
Still a
Um,
slide. Okay, just a minute.
the
Close it.
slide.
Oh, I see.
Okay, that's good. Well done.
Okay. Good. Here we go.
Yep.
We've been told a story that we are selfish, aggressive, rugged
it full screen.
individuals. If that were true, we should have no problem with physical distancing and self-isolation. The pandemic showed us that this story is not who we are. That's because we evolved in cooperative bands of kin and non-kin, where we were nurtured and welcomed by all members of the community. We lived together, we gathered food together, we sang together, and we danced together. We knew it would have been impossible to survive on our own. But together, we thrived. Today, we are living in a culture that goes against everything it means to be human. Our culture emphasizes toughness over tenderness, isolation instead of togetherness, even for babies. As a result, we are depressed, anxious, chronically ill, and at the bottom of every international indicator for health. We are stuck in a cycle of competitive detachment where we feel disconnected from others and even ourselves, while at the same time feeling we have to compete for anything worthwhile. There's a way not only to break this cycle, but to create a new one that reclaims our humanity and helps us heal ourselves in our culture. We can create a cycle of connected, cooperative companionship. For most of our existence, we have created culture from the bottom up, from the way we raise children, and from the top down, from the stories we told one another. Children were nested in loving, supportive village care, growing deep connections to and respect for the natural world. In modern culture, children are raised with disconnection, with little concern for their basic needs, and with an almost random set of relational experiences. They still hear stories conveyed by various media. They are full of put-downs, egoism, and violence. Babies require an external womb experience to grow and connect with others. They need calming, affectionate care, immediate responses to keep them optimally aroused while rapidly growing brain connections. Without this early care, without meeting our millions-year-old biological needs for our evolved nest, babies learn a pattern of disconnection from the self, from others, and from the world, manifesting in self-protective mindsets and irritation with people from different backgrounds or with different ideas. We withdraw from social life because it's just too painful, triggering the traumas we experienced early on in life. We constantly seek to fill a void we were never biologically intended to experience. The good news is that it's possible to break this cycle of competitive detachment and restore the cycles of connected, cooperative companionship. We can learn what our basic needs are and find ways to help everyone get them met. We can take steps that open our minds and hearts and build empathy towards others who are different from us. We can become aware and careful about where we put our greatest asset, our attention. We can build attachment to the natural world by immersing ourselves in its beauty and developing our connection with its aliveness. Cultures can and do change. It begins with each one of us realizing our inherent nature to be empathic, flexible, and sovereign beings, followed by taking steps to heal and restore our core nature. Many of us assume that the culture we live in mirrors innate human nature, but today's dominant cultures of competitive, destructive detachment are rare and recent. Nearly every other culture that has ever existed during our species' history over millions of years has been one of connected, cooperative companionship. To heal ourselves and our world, we simply must return to this way of nurturing children and communities. For more information, go to breakingthecyclefilm.org.
Fantastic.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I hope most people heard it properly. Have we got some more questions? There is some in the chat with a few people. William, you had some questions?
Yes, I was wondering if Dr. Narvaez, did I mispronounce your name?
Narvaez, but you can call me Darcia.
Darcia, okay.
Yeah.
Are you familiar at all with the work of George Devereaux and to a lesser extent Geza Roheim? He was back in the middle part of the 20th century. He was a practitioner of psychoanalysis who did cross-cultural analysis, and I was wondering if any of that has survived in the work in what's done today.
I don't know. I don't know. Can you be more specific? Anything specific that
No,
you can?
it's been a long
Oh.
time since I read him,
Yeah.
so I really can't. But I do know that he was working in psychoanalysis, And
Well,
he was, you know, he worked both with Australians, I believe, and with mostly with Southwestern Americans. You know, the Indians, things like that. And I was just wondering if, you know, he had a couple of theories about how to do it, and some ways of doing it. And I really wish I remembered right off the top of my head what they were. But he did use based it all in psychoanalysis, but he, you know, he was throwing out things like the Oedipus complex because it didn't really matter
right.
in
Yeah,
that context.
that's right. So the Oedipus complex comes from, presumably from the mistreatment of children. So at least from the evolved nest perspective. So psychoanalysis doesn't have a good, or Freud, I should say, doesn't have a good reputation anymore in psychology generally. But he had some good intuitions about, you know, how the brain is being engraved by early experience. Yes, and neuroscience shows us that now. He just kind of went off the rail in terms of all the sexual stuff. But the other thing is, I'm researching indigenous psychology essentially, and it's very different, as you noticed in my brief explanation of the indigenous worldview. It's we're kind of taught to be disconnected from our heart mind and not develop that very well, our intuitions and our emotions to guide our lives. We're taught to shut that down really in babyhood and in schooling, and go into your head and think about it and logic and all that. And that is so strange, and all the major religions warn against that. If you start to think too much, you think you're a thinking being, but that's not who you are really as a human. But so
Well, this morning I was reading a old article from American Anthropologist from like 1902, in which the guy's name was, I can't remember his name, I think it was Everett or something, but
Dan Everett, yeah.
The words that he kept using like 5 times on the same page was to describe the Iroquois mindset about religion was inchoate, and it just really got me that was the way they were thinking. And I do remember that Devereaux threw that kind of thinking just right out the window.
We've got quite a few hands up. I'm not sure if you.
Arif had a really nice question, but Arif says he can't use his mic. And he was saying he's very supportive after thinking many years himself as an anthropologist and evolutionary cognitive psychologist of the evolved nest idea. But he wonders why pedagogy isn't involved in the matrix. So he's asking about how to start raising happier children. How do we deal with issues like education and school? Does Darcia have a vision of functional schooling, or should we just get rid of school?
I'm my psychology's in education, or my degree's in educational psychology. So I've done a lot of moral education stuff in school with schools and school teachers and all. But that was my earlier work, and now I'm trying to integrate it with the evolved nest. And so we do have a checklist for early childhood care centers about how to support children who are there with evolved nest components. In terms of schools, yes, I agree. They're very destructive of the way we want to raise a human being anyway. So really children should be playing most of the time, and following and being with adults, doing whatever the adults are doing, and not having special attention, but just being part of the community, ideally. But a lot of adults are sitting in front of screens, so what are the kids going to do, right? It's very weird now. But there are a few kinds of schools that I think are good, Waldorf and perhaps some Montessori's, forest kindergartens. But I think we really have to rethink it But of course, school is part of the system that's trying to control people to keep the system going, right? You want to have an obedient set of slaves, essentially, to run the factories and the whatever else, the service economy. So it's like, that's a big question for the whole system, right? So I'm trying to just sneak in here and say, oh, look, we got to change our children. We want them to reach their human potential, don't we? Well, if they do that, they're going to change the system. Don't tell anybody. But so there's multiple levels of things, and I focus in on most of my work on the early childhood because it's so lifelong impactful. And there's a lot more to do, though, at every level.
It's brilliant, Darcia, because we've got a whole lot of questions suddenly popped up. So
Okay.
so Tam,
and Stacey, then Anand. Except it's Carlos, isn't it? Tam first.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks, Darcia. That was wonderful. It's hugely inspiring. And tying in with a lot of stuff that's been ringing around my head. And even just today, here in Scotland, I heard on the radio, they said that 1 in 20 people now in Scotland are having suicidal thoughts. 1 in 20. I mean, whoa, is mind-blowing, literally. But there's such a sort of sway back and forward, this pendulum of sort of what seems like power in some ways, and that I was getting reminded a lot of when you were talking, and then you brought it up about ACEs, about adverse childhood experiences, and Scotland has placed itself saying we want to be the first ACE awareness nation in the world, and they had a conference on it, and I was given the great honor of opening that conference with a poem. But I thought it was so wonderful, and that the recognition here of the importance of childhood and developing right from the start has also had a big bearing on me that I saw in locally struggle. We've saved a piece of land, and a big part of that saving it was by calling that piece of land the Children's Wood. And we said we were going to save this Children's Wood, which was, it was a little bit of derelict land, but we decided that's what it would be called. And the children were completely involved in the campaign to save it, me on a megaphone and them doing the other chants. And we have managed to. I didn't believe we would even be able to do it, but it is so vitally important that we recognize that the importance of childhood, but also involving the children in the struggle. The other thing about Scotland that's happened, certainly in comparison with the rest of the UK, is spanking. Physical hitting of children has been outlawed in Scotland. You're not allowed to do it at all. And that is so important. But that's the thing. At the same time, our drugs, our problems with drugs are equally as bad, if not worse. They're certainly worse than anywhere else in Europe. So we have this sort of duality of going on, of strange in Scotland. But the big thing that came across to me there at the end, we're watching the film is lovely, but then what struck me was, is this not saying that then revolution isn't actually necessary? That we can do it individually, or we can do it under capitalism. And then I thought, right at the end of the film, it talks about all of this past before the 10,000 years. But what it doesn't bring up is that there was a need for a revolution to happen way back, the one that Chris talked about when he spoke after your talk. Because what struck me with Chris's was that, he talked about the mess, and the mess got sorted out back then. But I thought, is it the same solution we have to the mess now? Is it the same, is it the same mess we have to deal with? But certainly there was the need for revolution, and there's a need for revolution now. I would have thought, and so that's my thoughts as such.
Yeah, well, if you talk to Indigenous leaders, it's what's happened is the masculine principle or masculine domination has gotten out of hand, and the feminine, the divine feminine, the feminine principle, and the feminine ways, women have to be the leaders now, and that's what Indigenous elders are saying around the world. And things have shifted, and the Mother Earth is ready for this shift again. So yeah, I think it's interesting to have that. I hadn't thought about the mess earlier that Chris brought up, but you don't want to put that in the film because people can't take it all in. It's too much nuance, right? So, but yeah, I think we're there again. It's overdone masculinity now has to be balanced again, and you guys are all about that, right?
Yeah.
Thank
Is
you.
Carlos, you next? Carlos, is it Carlos?
Or Stacey.
Well, Stacey.
Can you hear me?
Carlos.
Hello?
Hello.
One moment, Stace, quickly, can you help me?
Hang on just a second. I gotta help Carlos. You push the thing?
Oh, yeah. One moment.
Push the button in.
One moment, it's in. Oh,
We can
hello,
hear
can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Ah, wonderful. Hi. Right, Darcia, I was wondering, what you're suggesting is that as humanity, in our evolutionary trajectory as it is, we have suffered a fall in our moral status as a species, where we've gone from this place where children would have, I think I agree with you. If you look at other mammals, just for example, cats and dogs, dogs and cats that are later weaned make far more rounded adult animals, much more competent and more adaptable. And I can see that is probably applies to our species as well. But what I'm suggesting, I think Chris was talking about an earlier revolution, but I think, are you suggesting that is our natural state of existence, that we raise well-rounded, longer-weaned individuals for moral reasons, and not simply that is the evolutionary path that helped our species survive better? So therefore, we've suffered a degradation with the evolution of our species.
Well, I think we evolved to raise people well. I mean, the way the planet works is you have animals who want to be adaptive and live well on the earth, and but we forgot that, right? We've gotten a culture that's dominates biology.
Okay, what I mean is, because there are many species that living well means devouring their own kind, including our own species. I mean, anthropology is not unknown and not uncommon in our history, I believe. So if you're raising individuals and there may be somebody living 20 miles away with a canoe that likes to eat babies, do you understand what I mean?
Right. So I do integrate. I mean, you're.
I mean, we survive by sometimes not conscious processes.
Carlos, let Darcia reply.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry.
That's all right. Well, you're pointing at a point, maybe an area which I haven't spelled out or thought through adequately, but I do. I like Darwin talking about how the moral sense is engraved in us. It's through the tree of life that we have developed our particular capacities that he mentions. But I think we didn't realize, or he didn't realize, others haven't realized, that it's epigenetic, that it happens from the nest. It doesn't happen from genes. And we've gotten away from understanding our human becoming, right? We're not human beings, we're human becomings, and babies especially. And so it's just the materialistic, the capitalistic, colonialistic, the civilized orientation to material. And so it's this whole kind of tsunami of a whole bunch of different things pulled into the hurricane of destruction. So the focusing in on all the things I was mentioning, right? The left hemisphere focus, the undermining little by little of then the male domination through herding, or the plow in agriculture, whatever it was, that just little inches towards this strange place we're in. But there are a lot of factors to it. And so our morality changed too. We think it's fine to be dominant. So I don't know if I can't really probably answer, but your ideas would be most welcome. If you have more, let me know.
We've got 2 more people with their hands up. Anand? Go on, come on.
Anand?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not coming from an anthropology background, but I really resonated with some of your talk, Darcia, and thank you. The university thing was really fascinating for me. I've been thinking about that in other contexts, but I hadn't seen that. And I kept being reminded of this Kith by Jay Griffith. And I've actually worked in preschools, Montessori and Waldorf in a number of settings, including very urban and quite rural. I'm in Nairobi. And it's really been interesting and kind of almost healing for me to re-educate through that and see that what's kind of missing in a modern urban sausage making kind of education, sausage factory, I think Michael Rosen calls it, who's an English poet. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking about children figuring out how to be in the world, something I noticed a lot with young kids was they would model themselves on who's successful, or they'd look around them and be so aware of what the other models were, but it'd be interesting what models they saw as, even from babies, like what models they should be following, both positively and negatively. And that was just kind of interesting to think about. And I wonder how much you've explored on that, because it feels like instead of going towards a mean form of, or a kind of average form of behavior, that might be dragging the baseline ever so more in different directions.
Well, I think the orientation for children is to imitate, right? And to explore modeling other behaviors. That's a natural pedagogy. And so whatever it is they see is rewarded, I suppose, too, in our culture where we're hierarchical, they're going to follow that. They're just going to take up what looks like whoever gets the cookie, right? They want to get that cookie. So they're going to follow the same behavior. Whereas in our, foraging context, it's more interactive with the natural world, and whoever successfully swings on the vine, they're going to follow that kind of action, right? Because it's within that context, it's more rewarding. So I don't know if I can answer anything, but yeah.
I think I was trying to say, like, it feels like people might have been rewarded for healthier behavior, and now because people are rewarded for unhealthier behavior, we may actually get something like a weird feedback loop to reward that, and then the next generation feels like that's the right kind of behavior to rather than centering back on healthier behavior.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and you can see this with the food, the kind of food we eat now. The food companies, multinationals, put in all these addictive qualities to fast food, and then you can't stop, and you don't know why. And and if mom has had that while you were in the womb, you're going to be oriented those flavors and such, and you don't know why, or you're fat or obese or whatever. So there's a lot of, so I talk about intergenerational effects on the next generations. Yeah, and it's just been getting worse in the last few generations in particular. I think we've got all the toxicities that the chemists have produced in the last 100 years, right? With the gas that they used in war, there's now fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, and we're all eating it, the glyphosate, everything. So that's that, and we know those have effects on your sociality and your wellness of various kinds. So yeah, thanks.
Zashe, yeah, it was Zakit.
Hi. So I was wondering, there's obviously a lot of kind of patriarchal medicalization going on in general, also on women's bodies, and a lot of women have been also, well, they kind of believe and support this kind of patriarchal narrative, and they choose C-sections, for example. They refuse breastfeeding because their tits might fall. I don't know what they believe. And yeah, maybe they're not, you know, they're very career oriented, so they just focus on that instead of childcare. Yeah, lots of these kind of things within the system, but women's belief themselves in this and support this. And I was just wondering if you had answers to how, yeah, to kind of break this kind of cycle.
Well, one of the issues is if a mom has not been nurtured well herself, then she doesn't develop maybe the oxytocin system, the cuddle hormone system doesn't work well, or vagus nerve. She doesn't want to be intimate. She doesn't want to have the baby on her belly after birth. And I have nurse friends who tell me that mothers, they've seen quite a number of mothers who give birth and they don't want to touch the baby. You know, something's broken there, right? And so I think they go ahead and put the baby on the skin to skin. That's the rule in baby-friendly hospitals. But the mom's caregiving attachment system has to kick in. And sometimes that does it. Just carrying the baby around skin to skin for as long, you know, as much as possible. That actually can trigger then the species memory for being nurturing and just loving it. I mean, our heritage is to love babies and just enjoy hanging on to them, right? And we have a lot of parents who have been, you know, the things have been disrupted one way or another. So I think we have to inform women about it, but also we have to be, you know, so they can make a decision with their intellect. They also have to have the physical embodied experience of loving to be close to others. And we've lost a lot of that in some of our societies. You know, it's hands off, don't touch me. And so then, you know, there's something going on there. And if that person has a baby, poor baby, perhaps, unless the species memory kicks in. So it's a complicated issue. In my work with nonprofits in the States, we mostly work with people who know they have a baby and they're told, oh, don't touch the baby or leave them to cry, don't spoil the baby, you should use sleep training. And they go, that's wrong. They know what they feel is wrong. And so then they go and find the pockets of information that our group and other groups provide. And then they go, oh, thank you. I knew it was wrong. And thank you for confirming that with research, you know, and such. So I think it is a challenge. Do you have ideas for it?
Personally, not
what
really.
To do? Yeah. In the decades ago, psychoanalytic and medical personnel would write about babies, and they were worried about career women because they were not very warm, and they weren't attentive, they weren't responsive, and they had more interest in, you know, their own work. So we probably could say those women should not be mothers, or they need to have an allo mother right there. You know, who's going to be the nurturing one for that child and keep them with that child for at least 5 years. No, not everyone needs to be a mom.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've seen just women using children as a kind of I don't know if it's a commodity thing but there's definitely something that's more capitalist about having a baby to some women, not everyone, obviously. Right. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
There's in the chat, Jenny had a point about autism spectrum condition and how that might fit into the evolved nest ideas. Is autism spectrum to be thought of as an extreme form of lack of nestedness rather than inborn and genetic? What do you say?
Autism is an outcome of many causes. So there's some kids are missing a genetic marker. Some children have been maybe undercared for or traumatized in a particular sensitive time. So there's multiple reasons for it. So it's not just and it could be because so many births since the 70s. It's interesting that since the 1970s, the rates of autism parallel the use of Pitocin, which is the artificial oxytocin used to induced labor in moms. They're the same rates of autism and the use have occurred. And so there's some suspicion that that might trigger it as well. It's flooding the mom's body with oxytocin, flooding the baby's body with oxytocin in ways that are abnormal. Normally in naturalistic birth, the oxytocin flows in and out with endorphins to make it pretty painless to give birth. But when you just provide the IV with oxytocin, it's constant, and then the labor is pains are worse, and then you need a drug to deal with that, and it's like all this interference. So there's probably some kids who have that issue as well. And then there's the toxins in the environment, plastics, and so many things are in our umbilical cords of babies now, and the even the particles, the soot particles are in babies in the womb. So lots of causes there, I think.
Great. Okay. Ali Zhong, you have a question in the chat. I'm not quite sure what it is, and I wonder if you can say anything. It's about why Indigenous people think all things have spirits. Focus human more than dominant society. People instead focus more on the world with the belief that humans only having one spirit. Is that questioning the opposition between Indigenous people thinking spirit includes the whole world versus our type of society where we just think only humans have spirit? So maybe Ali is asking more explanation there.
Yeah, so yeah, I could speak to it. So there's a sensibility about it. So we have lost a lot of our polysemy capacities, or our ability to even perceive, the communications from the animals or the winds or the weather. And we've just kind of gotten into a closed mind, walled in minds, right? It's how we develop people instead of outside. And so what do we learn from a dead space? Not much. But if you grow up outside, you're learning how to, that sound means this, and this kind of glare means that, or whatever it is. And so you have a sense when your right hemisphere is well developed from all the nestedness, you're going to be able to, tune in. And we don't know how to do that very much anymore. It takes some major transformative experiences to do that, spending months outside or something. So I think that's part of the reason because we're in our left hemisphere, in the left brain. You might look at the book, The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. He's a psychoanalyst, therapist, neuroscientist from the UK, whose book reviews the right hemisphere, left hemisphere research, and points out how different they are when they numb one side of the brain or the other. The left brain thinks it knows everything. And, even if it's numb, or the right hemisphere is told to do something, and then will do something, and the left hemisphere is awake, and you ask it why did that happen? Oh, makes up some reason. It's so good at that. And it really, The Master and His Emissary title is about that. The master sends his emissary out to the lands to see how everything's going, and soon the emissary thinks he's in charge, and that's what's happened then. And so if the left brain is in charge, so it's not an integrated brain, you're going to think, all that spiritual, emotional stuff is gooey, irrelevant to the world, right? It's silly. And I think that's part of what we've done.
Yeah. Thank you. Have we got any further questions, or are we just about? And Anand's making a point about Daniel Dennett on our memory of dreams. Do you want to say more about that, Anand?
Sure. Just briefly, in the philosophy of mind, there's this idea of how much are we remembering dreams, and how much are we processing memories, or how much are we just kind of ad-libbing a script and making it up in real time as we think about things, because it doesn't seem like our memories of dreams are very real. They're much more dynamic.
Among hunter-gatherers, I've read reports on how they really take seriously their dreams, and they take them as signals for things. And sometimes people dream the same thing, and they spend their morning discussing the dreams and what they mean and what to do. And so I think we have lost that as well, perhaps because we immerse ourselves in so many other things during the day rather than just being alive on the earth. We're watching all these films and whatever, and Zoom. So I think we've lost our connection to dream reality, which is assumed to be the real reality by, you know, Aboriginal Australian Aborigines and others. So I always look skeptically on lab science because the baselines are all screwed up. You're testing mostly weird people, right? Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic people, and only a small little portion of that, mostly sophomores in college, second year university students. And that's doesn't tell you much about humanity. They're hardly developed, right? It takes till age 30 at least to become an adult, assuming you haven't had traumatic and whatever kinds of experiences along the way. So I always take those with a grain of salt.
Okay, I think we're gonna wind up. Chris, did you want to say something?
No, I'm just going to say that exactly.
Chris?
That. The recording file gets.
Yeah, I think we're nearly there. But
yeah. Just one.
I was just going to make a last point.
Go on, Kim.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to say?
No, go on, Kim. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say that that this, if you like, a baby's eye view of the world and a perspective that comes from children and their growth and development is actually becoming much more widespread in paleoanthropology, evolutionary anthropology, hunter-gatherer studies, and archaeology as well. And that augurs very well because it's a kind of bottom-up view and of the strategies that are the things that really are transformative. So even though there's such a grim, you know, just a grim position of the huge challenge of facing and confronting capitalism and capitalism's ability to exploit and manipulate, nevertheless, we have in some senses gone through this before. We have in some senses, you know, been through the terrible mess and overcome it through strategies that were bottom up, interactive, intersubjective, and they are our human capacities without a question. And there's a growing awareness among so many people from all over the world that this is the case. So let's hope that, you know, Darcia's guidance here and her overview here is gonna help inspire us to, you know, to put that out, to push that, and to learn from that. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Darcia, for that overview, and I think everybody's really enjoyed it. Thank you.
If
very
you can
much.
send any research suggestions that you just mentioned of where people are on this same path, let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, there is a kind of, I think it's a growing tendency to look from that perspective. It's not just female strategies or women's strategies, but children's strategies, if you like. So the idea of play as the necessary as the matrix for education is becoming stronger and stronger with hunter-gatherer studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.
Yes, and we must stay together. So fantastic, absolutely marvelous, wonderful talk. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.